Modern tentpoles have a strange problem. They can destroy planets and still feel oddly punny. Not in budget, but in spirit. They know how to escalate, but not how to inspire wonder. They can simulate urgency, flatten cities, and drown the audience in scientific gobbledygook, yet still leave you with the emotional aftertaste of flat beer. 2026's first blockbuster promised the moon, and early reviews hinted at an enthusiastic response. But we've been there before and left disappointed. At this stage, we can't help but wonder, is this just another glossy extinction machine or one of those rare crowd pleasers that actually leaves a mark? Well, that's what we're going to find out in this episode. I'm Peter from Vinyl N Celluloid, and this is my review of Project Hail Mary. Now, this is an interesting title because it caught me off guard, and part of the reason it caught me off guard is quite personal. 11 years ago, I read Andy Weir's The Martian, and unlike many cinephiles I know, I actually loved Ridley Scott's adaptation. I loved its optimism, its procedural rhythm, and its fate incompetence. At the time, that story of a trapped man somewhere he was desperate to leave hit me in a very direct way. So hearing another Weir adaptation was gonna hit the screens immediately caught my attention. The catch is that, unlike The Martian, I hadn't read Artemis or the source novel for this movie, and I also avoided all kinds of promotional material. And so I walked into this movie with the wrong expectation. I was bracing for polished disaster movie nonsense, something in the general vicinity of The Core or the entertaining Armageddon, only with better rendering and a more expansive leading man. You know, the sort of thing that mistakes cosmic peril for meaning and hopes a big enough score will do the rest. What I got instead was far more disarming. A large-scale sci-fi adventure with genuine feeling, one that understands the truth Hollywood keeps misplacing. Grandeur only matters when something recognizably human is anchoring it. And that really is the surprise. Directors Lord and Miller take a premise built for apocalypse theatrics and steer it somewhere warmer, stranger, and much more emotionally precise. This is not really a story about annihilation as pageantry. It is, after all, a story about trust, cooperation, and the strange miracle of trying to understand someone who should, in theory, be impossible to understand. But before I get ahead of myself, let's go over the usual recap section, shall we? Project Hail Mary follows Ryland Grace, played by Ryan Gosling, a man who wakes up alone aboard a spacecraft with no memory of who he is, why he's there, or why his body feels like it's been hit by every bus in Europe. As his memory slowly returns, he pieces together the truth. Earth is facing an extinction-level crisis linked to a strange astrophysical phenomenon that is draining the sun's energy, and humanity has launched a desperate mission to find a solution before the planet freezes into oblivion. Now, that alone would already be enough for most sci-fi films. One man, one ship, one impossible task. But Project Hail Mary doesn't stop there. What begins as a survival story gradually turns into something stranger, funnier, and far more emotionally resonant when Grace discovers he's not the only being in the cosmos trying to solve this problem. From that point on, the film becomes a hybrid of procedural sci-fi, first contact adventure, buddy comedy, and end-of-the-world thriller. On the surface, it is a race against extinction, but underneath, it becomes something more intimate, a story about shared problem-solving, mutual dependence, and the odd grace of companionship under pressure. Now, as you can probably tell, this shift in emphasis is one of the main reasons why this movie landed so well with me. So with that in mind, let's look at the 4 aspects that make Project Hail Mary one of the most satisfying mainstream sci-fi titles I've had the pleasure to watch in years. Now, the first thing this movie gets right is something most blockbusters keep fumbling. It has a beating heart. I think by now I've made this point quite obvious. This sounds basic. It shouldn't be. These days it almost feels revolutionary for a big studio film to let sincerity exist without immediately undercutting it with a smirk, a quip, or some Marvel-branded defense mechanism against feeling anything too directly. This movie avoids that trap. Yes, it has jokes, but the emotional core is never treated like an embarrassment. The film actually believes in tenderness, which immediately sets it apart from half the tentpole sludge we're usually fed. And the smartest decision by far is the central bond. I'm not going to get into too many details here, but rather than framing first contact as military hysteria, philosophical sermonizing, or mankind staring into the abyss while someone whispers about destiny, the film treats it as shared labor. Translation, repetition, trial and error. The kind of thing we seen 10 years ago in Arrival. Two beings trying to make themselves legible to one another because, quite simply, they need each other. And that's such a good instinct. Because the affection here isn't really announced, it accumulates. And it grows through routine, dependency, humor, and the awkwardness of learning how another mind works. The screenplay, and I'm guessing Weir's novel, really earn these feelings instead of demanding them. And by the time it asks you to care, you're already too invested. And you already do. And that's why the whole thing clicks. This isn't merely a disaster movie with feelings stapled onto it. It's a friendship story disguised as a studio spectacle. Now, the second reason why this is already one of 2026's highlights is the way the film combines visual ambition with narrative purpose. Because let's be honest, loads of films look expensive, but that's not the same thing as looking meaningful. A lot of blockbusters use scale the way insecure people use watches, as proof of value. Bigger, shinier, louder. But here the visuals don't just decorate the story, they deepen it. The emptiness in space, the fragility of the ship, the weird beauty of the unknown, the contrast between cosmic scale and emotional intimacy. All of it gives the imagery a dramatic function rather than leaving it as mere wallpaper. And this is where the comparison I kept thinking about becomes quite useful. You see, to me, the relationship between The Martian and Project Hail Mary can be mapped through the same tension that exists between 2001: A Space Odyssey and 2010, the year we made contact. The Martian is procedural, pragmatic, optimistic, and grounded in the pleasure of watching intelligent people solve one problem after another. The same way 2010, while still relatively accessible, expands its parent text outward into geopolitics, larger scale tension, and cosmic implication. Likewise, this film takes Weir's process-heavy, problem-solving machinery and scales it towards something more emotionally and philosophically expansive. It still loves the nuts and bolts, it still gets a kick out of showing science as process rather than magic. But it also reaches for awe, loneliness, first contact, and the possibility that the universe may contain minds radically unlike ours. But then, on the other side of the equation, you have 2001, the abstract, mythic, near wordless cathedral of cosmic evolution, a title where Stanley Kubrick uses space as metaphysical terrain. Now, I'm not saying that Lord and Miller go that far, nor should they, but they absolutely borrow some of that sense of big canvas wonder. So, what we get at the end of the day is a film that sits between those traditions. It has the procedural appeal of The Martian, but it keeps glancing upward towards the mysterious, the transcendent, the almost Kubrickian. And that's a very difficult balancing act. And this movie really pulls it off far better than expected. Now, the third reason to watch this title is Ryan Gosling. He's just like me, really. And honestly, the whole movie would have collapsed if he had gotten this wrong. This is one of those roles that look deceptively easy on paper. You know, a charming lead in a high concept sci fi film reacting to things, delivering exposition, cracking jokes, looking bewildered in corridors. But the seemingly simplicity of the role, well, that's exactly the sort of thing that can go catastrophically wrong if the actor pitches it even slightly off. And Gosling doesn't. He finds the exact register the movie needs. He's funny without becoming smug, vulnerable without becoming pathetic, and emotionally open without tipping into that faux profound sentimentality mode a lot of prestige sci-fi performances seem contractually obligated to hit. Interstellar. But more importantly, he makes intelligence cinematic. And that's no small thing, because at the end of the day, he still has to explain things constantly. He has to deliver that good old exposition and hold the audience's hand through scientific logic, emotional shifts, memory fragments, fear, loneliness, and wonder, often in the same sequence. I think another actor would have played all of this like Tony Robbins having a nervous breakdown. But Gosling, he plays it like a man whose brain is trying to stay one step ahead of his panic. And that's what gives this performance real looseness. He's warmer here than in First Man, funnier too, and crucially, more transparent. He gives the film its human scale. and in a title this dependent on connection that matters more than any visual effect ever could. And yes, supporting cast member Sandra Hüller also brings real steel to the film. Even when the script edges her slightly too close to the stern German authority figure, she still gives the material force, intelligence, and enough bite and personality to avoid caricature and exaggerated stereotypes. But make no mistake, this is Gosling's movie and he carries it beautifully. And that brings me to the fourth and final reason why this title works. This is basically a sci-fi greatest hits package that somehow doesn't feel cynical, and in fact, it feels fresh. And that's an achievement. Because let's be honest, there's very little in this movie that is new or hasn't been done before. I mean, Project Hail Mary absolutely stands on the shoulders of everything that came before it. You can feel the DNA of survival sci-fi, first contact films, old school disaster cinema, procedural space adventures, feel-good studio spectacles, and even buddy comedy rhythms tucked into the machinery. Hell, there's even a direct mention to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Nothing short of a miracle that Lord and Miller pull off is that this title never feels like a soulless remix. It actually feels like a confident one. A movie that borrows from the genre's past, but it doesn't do so with the dead-eyed, algorithmic energy of a streaming executive reverse engineering engagement. It uses those familiar pieces and tropes to build something emotionally coherent, something that knows the pleasures of the form and delivers them without becoming trapped by them. That's why I kept thinking of it as a greatest hits compilation. Not because it lacks identity, but because it understands the lineage it belongs to. It takes the best bits, the process, the spectacle, humor, awe, tension, and intimacy, and really arranges them with enough conviction that the result feels new rather than derivative. Mind you, I'm not saying this title is flawless. There are some plot holes here and there. A few of the jokes flirt a bit too much with that Marvel brand, almost landing too close to puncture sincerity. And yeah, some of the rocky mentions can feel a touch too pleased with themselves, as though the film briefly doesn't trust its own emotional rhythm unless it throws on the gloves and starts shadowboxing. But hey, these are limitations, not fatal wounds. Because what the movie gets right matters far more. It believes that intelligence can be exciting, that friendship can carry spectacle, and that decency is not dramatically useless. Which these days, well, it almost counts as radical. So, when all is said and done, this is exactly the sort of film Hollywood used to make on a regular basis and really should be making more often. A warm, funny, visually impressive, emotionally generous blockbuster that sends you out to cinema with that increasingly rare sensation of having been properly entertained without being treated like an idiot. It takes a premise that could have been pure end-of-the-world bombast and turns it into something more disarming. A story about cooperation, trust, and that fragile miracle of understanding someone utterly unlike yourself. That's why it landed, and that's why it surprised me. And that's why I'd strongly recommend seeing this movie as fast as possible on the biggest screen available before the internet does its thing and turns the best moments into content sludge. Because as I mentioned, for all its familiar ingredients, this film gave me something I genuinely wasn't expecting. A glimmer of hope that the feel-good, mega-budget, high-quality blockbuster hasn't gone extinct just yet.